All right, we're live everywhere. Welcome everyone to this pop-up episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. I don't. You already did one. How'd you intro this?
I introed it as saying this is like casual dress, casual dress type episode where we're not including this in our book or our official type of episode stream. It's just kind of like I heard something that was relevant to our
To your
general
interests.
discussion, so we thought we would educate our audience on the topic that we kind of bumped into during the day.
Okay, so this is totally free form, so I don't actually need to intro anything. But this pop-up episode is going to be interesting for me because apparently something's in the news about immigration, and I live under a rock, so I don't hear much about the news. So I think you can probably fill the world in, and by the world I mean me. I think probably everyone else has heard what the news is, but what's going on with immigration that we need to talk about?
I just wish we could play sound bites on the episode so we could play the Rick clip of, and that's the way the news goes. So, well, I guess you may not know then that the government is shut down, which for all intents and purposes.
I did hear something about that. It shuts down every couple of years, right? Didn't it shut down during Obama's second term for a little bit?
2013.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it has shut down before, and it'll shut down again. This one is somewhat newsworthy in terms of history because it's the first time that one party, and someone chided me for this, but I'm going with it because it's actually correct. It's the first time that one party has controlled both the House and the Senate, and had a sitting president, and there's been a shutdown. So the Republicans can control Congress and the presidency, and the government shut down. It's the first time. And again, the argument was, well, they don't control the Senate because in order to control the Senate, you need 60% because it's a supermajority.
Okay.
But
okay. That doesn't really count.
That's not actually even really correct. The person was saying that as a tactical point, but it's not really correct because even a simple majority can vote to change the rules and move to a simple majority instead of a supermajority on budgetary issues. So that's not even really correct. The Republicans still control the Senate. And by the way, I think we should preface this by saying both of us are pretty much apolitical. I really don't care about a government shutdown.
Yeah, I would say more than pretty much. I think we're coming at this completely objectively.
Yeah, exactly. So when I say that it's historical, I just mean that it's the first time that that's happened because to your point, budget shutdowns do happen pretty regularly.
It's just literally historical in that this has never happened before.
Exactly.
Okay, so the government's shut down, which I assume means all federal programs aren't receiving funding. Is mine like paychecks don't go out basically?
Yes and no. So there's there's two categories that still get paid. And it's like exempt. They're basically exempt, right? And these are kind of like,
I would assume Congress still gets paid. I would assume that's
right. The Congress, clearly they definitely still get paid. And so do like branches of the military and things like that. Like,
yeah, that makes sense. Like the
government that protect people or land are still getting paid. And there's some other exemptions. I think federal judges are still working. The rest are basically go on furlough, and they're basically off right now. And whether or not they get paid when they come back is dependent on how Congress decides to resolve this budgetary issue. So
how does this relate to immigration? Is it like an issue with immigration offices being shut down, or there's nobody patrolling the borders anymore? Is it just like a sea of people flooding in from Canada and Mexico at this point?
Well, I think that's true, but I don't think it has anything to do with the government shutdown. The reason that it's relevant to immigration is because that is the big issue that is keeping a budget from being signed. So on two fronts. So President Trump wants money to build a wall along the southern border of the United States, and the Democrats don't want to give it to him. So he is holding out, and on the Democrats, so he's threatening to end DACA, or he really did end DACA, which is the Dreamers Act, which basically allows young immigrants who weren't necessarily born here, but were raised here. It allows them to stay here, kind of thing. And so basically, that was an Obama thing. And I guess he did it via an executive order. So it's not really clear on whether it's even legal. So basically, Trump earlier in the presidency and says he's going to end DACA because it's not legal, not necessarily because he's against it, but because it's not legal. So he's going to end it. And DACA is a very hot button issue, and actually, it's a bipartisan support. But a lot of Republicans support DACA, and every Democrat supports DACA.
Yeah, I'm not. What's the argument against letting the kids stay who came here?
That they're illegal.
Just simply, I guess a lot of this stuff all comes down to litigation, because if you set the precedent that even if you're brought here illegally doesn't necessarily mean that you're an illegal immigrant, maybe set some weird precedent that could be used to expand programs in the future. Not necessarily that you disagree with letting kids stay if they've been here their entire lives, just that you disagree with the precedent being set.
Well, from what I understand, again, largely this is bipartisan support, because politically you can't say, hey, I want to ship a Hispanic kid who's been here since he's 2 and he's now 20. I want to ship him back to wherever he's from.
Didn't we do that? Wasn't Elian Gonzalez? Wasn't that a big thing?
Elian Gonzalez. I think that was related more to custody than actual immigration. But so no politician wants to come out and say, yeah, we're going to do that. So the people who are actually saying against DACA, they're just basically saying, I don't care that they're still here. They got here illegally, so they need to go. That's what they're saying.
Okay, so we've got like these chips on the table, and that's and I would assume Democrats are saying we're not going to sign off on a, and I guess some Republicans would have to, that we're not going to sign off on this budget until something's done about this.
Right. And so basically the negotiations predate the budgetary discussions. Well, somewhat. So Trump called the Democratic leaders together and was like, hey, I want this wall. You guys want DACA to continue. So you give me the wall. And he wanted like $14 billion for the wall, maybe more. I can't even remember.
I thought Mexico was paying for the wall. What happened to that?
And that was a campaign promise. The Mexican president kind of said, no, that's not going to happen. And so Donald Trump came back and said, well, when I said that, I didn't mean Mexico is directly going to pay for the wall. I meant because if the wall goes up, we can renegotiate NAFTA and then we'll get a better trade deal. And because we'll have a better trade deal, it will pay for the better trade deal.
It'll pay for itself.
Yeah, pay for itself. Exactly. So the Democrats said, great. If you give us DACA, we'll give you 1.4. We'll agree to $1.4 billion for the wall, which again was way short of what President Trump wanted. So those discussions parlayed into the larger budgetary issue, where basically Democrats were like, we're not going to sign off on it. And again, I'm all going off of 20th hand information because it's just based off of what leaks out of these conversations. But basically, the Democrats said, we're not going to sign off on any budgetary approval until you give us DACA. And well, everyone really wants DACA. Trump was 86ing that. He's like, look, if a budgetary plan gets to my desk that has DACA involved in it, I'm going to veto it because DACA is my chip to get the wall done. So he was not willing to give. He wanted DACA for the wall, and that was it. And he wasn't going to move. So in a way, so what I'm saying is the DACA is an immigration issue. The wall is an immigration issue. So that's how we arrive at immigration as a topic for this pop-up episode.
Okay. So I think we're going to try and relate this immigration issue back to an issue that's near and dear to my heart, which is automation. So I think the interesting thing with all of this immigration stuff is the idea of cost of labor. So I think, I don't know have there been numbers in terms of how, okay, so we got it's just so many numbers. But I think specifically related to how it would affect the number of illegal immigrants in this country if a wall was actually built, and what that would do to the amount of cheap labor that would be available to industries.
So I don't know that there has. I'm sure there has been studies that kind of presuppose what a wall would do to the number of immigrants who come here illegally, especially from, excuse me, Mexico, and that number will go down. The problem is everything is so partisan; it's tough to understand like what actually is real, and so you have some publications saying it would go down significantly. Some say it would not go down significantly. It's kind of up in the air. But what you can safely assume is that the amount of illegals crossing the Mexican border would go down. The discrepancy is by how much.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why that's interesting, and the reason why we're talking about this, is because the issue of automation is only going to become more prevalent in this country and the rest of the world. And I think one of the major things that's keeping automation from becoming even more widespread, especially in these industries where you have a lot of under the table paid illegal workers, is that it's so cheap just to have humans do these jobs as opposed to investing in automation and machines to actually do these jobs, because the machines themselves are largely a one-time upfront cost. So there's, I mean, businesses, for better or worse, are in the business of making money. So for the cost benefit analysis is basically how much is it going to cost to roll out large scale automation of our workforce versus how much do we have to pay this workforce currently. And I think there's a number of industries where illegal labor provides an unbelievably cheap solution for certain arenas that could easily be automated. So, you know, the meat and dairy industry could easily be automated, but most of that is done by cheap illegal labor. A lot of farming is done by cheap illegal labor that could easily be automated. So I think anything that affects the flow of cheap labor is only going to increase the rate at which automation occurs, it seems to me.
Sure. And the people, at least empirically, that are really want to crack down on immigration, they are talking about saving American jobs. And again, not a political issue here for us at all, but keeping illegals out is not going to keep American jobs. As a matter of fact, it may have drastically the other effect. And that's exactly what you said. Right now, and we could spin this off into so many different topics, but we talk about this all the time. Capitalism has a lot of good components of it. One of the non-good components of capitalism is that because people run companies and people aren't sure how long they're going to be at those companies, they're focused on the short-term profit. That's what they're focused on. They're not focused on the long-term good or the long-term profit. They're focused on the short-term profit in most respects. Amazon can afford to look 10 years down the road and so forth. A lot of other companies can't. So to your point, when they're presented with the option of hiring a company like us to write software to automate a large part of their business, but it's going to cost them $100 million in 2018, or they can pay $10 million to cheap labor every year going forward. And again, these companies aren't looking more than, a couple years down the road. They're going to go with the cheap labor every single time. But if that $10 million, if they don't have access to that cheap labor anymore, and that $10 million becomes $50 million a year, now they're saying, okay, we can pay $50 million each year, or we can just pay this $100 million in 2018 and never worry about it again. They're going to start looking toward that $100 million becomes a lot more attractive to them. And to your point, I mean, pretty much every industry can be automated. You just don't realize it because they don't make sense to look at yet. But one of the ones that gets brought up all the time when you're talking about illegal immigrants from south of the border is landscaping. I'm telling you right now, landscaping could be automated pretty easily. If you've ever seen a Roomba, that technology could easily cut your grass, and mini cranes could easily move stuff around your yard. I mean, it's not that difficult. So there are a lot of industries that really depend on that cheap labor. And if that cheap labor goes away, it's not going to turn into American jobs. It's going to turn into software and hardware jobs.
I think it's interesting too that there's really a race between uh, how quickly stuff is innovated and this cost of labor. And I think the cost of labor is being attacked on multiple fronts. Whenever I hear discussion about minimum wage and raising the minimum wage, my gut reaction is always, why would you keep people around at $20 an hour instead of $10 an hour when you could have a computer do that job just as easily? So if you're paying someone $20 an hour to work a register at McDonald's, and McDonald's is already doing this. I was just in London, and the vast majority of McDonald's there are actually touchscreen ordering systems. So you walk into a McDonald's and you punch your order in. There's maybe 3 or 4 people working in the back, and then they just put your order up and call your number out. So it would only expedite that process if you wanted to pay people twice as much as they're already being paid. Not to mention that there's also the price pressure from the other side, which is that as there's more and more competition and more companies innovating in this space, the solutions themselves, there's going to be a price war there. So they're only going to become cheaper and cheaper. So it seems like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, but you're going to rapidly increase the rate at which stuff is automated if you raise the price of labor.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, there's a there's like a scaling involved with technology, right? So you use McDonald's example. Around here, all the Wendy's are automated, and Amazon just opened their first completely humanless store in Manhattan. No humans are involved at all. So my point is, the technology outlays right now to build that is expensive. But the same technology that went into automating Wendy's can be used to automate McDonald's, can be used to automate Taco Bell. So there's a scale there, and the more businesses automate, the cheaper it's going to be for other businesses to automate. So it's a slippery slope, and that's why I said, like, you push minimum wage increases, you push the shutdown of immigration, you're definitely only hastening that return to scaling out the technology needed to automate industries. Not to mention now that companies, some of them are coming back to the U.S. because taxes are being lowered, so it's not as expensive. It's not as expensive as it was, but they have a lot of overseas type operations because the taxes are lower, and Trump is trying to force them to come back to the United States by giving them incentives to be here. Well, more like threaten them with penalties if they don't come back. And so if they come back and they can't lower their costs other ways, they're going to cut their labor force and replace it with technology. So there's a lot of unintended consequences in this race to protect American jobs.
And it almost seems like it's something of a lost cause.
Well,
which is the really weird thing, because what seems different about this time is that in the past there's always been the opportunity to shift into different spheres. So when people stopped working on farms, they started working in offices. It doesn't seem to me like there's an analogous situation here where there's going to be anywhere for people to transition to.
Yeah, and it's like you said, innovation never loses. If you look back throughout the history of mankind, innovation wins.
That's almost the story of mankind, is the history of innovation.
Right, exactly. So government regulation can only delay the inevitable for so long. It will eventually happen, and there's no going back. You don't put the genie back in the bottle. So all it would take is one administration to sort of push the envelope, because once the outlays have been made, companies are going to keep using those. They have no incentive to shut down the machines once they're on. But yeah, to your point, this is going to happen, and it's just funny to see that it's happening because we're trying to prevent the exact same thing we're trying to prevent a problem, but we're making it worse. And that's right. To your other point, like, what's going to happen with all these people? It's a really interesting thing, because we're in a good place, because not only do our client base, does our potential client base expand as more companies are looking to automate, but our labor is going to get cheaper. It is going to be cheaper for us to hire developers because more people will be entering the technology marketplace looking for jobs. But it's not something you just transition to easily. You know, we've been doing this for
Over a
20,
decade, each of
yeah,
us
yeah,
collectively.
definitely over a decade. It probably 2002 is when I started, and I was kind of a late bloomer in this, and we have to keep up with this every single day to learn new stuff. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
And we already have automated huge swaths of our business. I mean, we're largely or almost entirely at this point on AWS, which is the automation of an entire sector of the tech industry.
That's right. That's right. And we're not naive enough to think that we're safe from this. We have to have safeguards against. We don't want to try to block automation. We want to stay on the forefront of automation to keep ourselves relevant. Because, you know, as you just said, a big part of the software development industry and the hardware industry was the infrastructure, the system administrators, the solutions architects. Those jobs are being replaced, or at least consolidated. What once took 100 people can now be done with 2 people, and that's in the technology industry. So we're not safe from it. No one's safe from it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that's going to require adjusting.
Yeah, I think maybe an interesting topic down the line might be ways, even like a policy discussion of how you handle this situation. I mean, it's too much to get into right now, but stuff like the universal basic income, or I don't even know. There's no solution that jumps out to me to deal with the fact that a couple 100 million people might have no job and no prospects for future employment. So
yeah, and it's weird because the kind of libertarian mantra is that we'll figure it out kind of thing. Like, how do you like a pure libertarian would say that the court system should be privatized. And it's like, how in the world is that going to work? We can't figure it out. Well, if you're forced to, you'll figure it out, kind of thing. And I'm not saying I don't agree with the court system being privatized, but my point is, just because we don't have an answer to the problem of having a lot of unemployment doesn't necessarily mean there won't be a solution born out of innovation to do something with those people who are out of work.
That sounds like the most political response to me is we'll figure it out. Don't worry about
it. It's kind of like medicine. It's like if I ever get a horrible disease, I'm confident we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. We got this covered. Well, that's probably a good place to stop for now. Maybe we'll do a pop-up episode on
horrible illnesses,
policy implications, and horrible illnesses. Yeah. Yeah. So keep an eye out for that, everyone. Get excited. But yeah, that'll do it for now. Thanks, Cody. See you guys.